Hey everybody, welcome back. Here we are with Chapter 3, Ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? We're covering a lot in this chapter, so hang on tight, take your notes. I'm going to run through it here. We'll cover stuff in class, but let's dive in, take a look. First thing you're going to see in the chapter is a case study. Once again, pay attention to these case studies. They're not just thrown in there for fun. We're going to reference them back, and they give good, solid examples. When you go to do things like write FRQs, they're great things to pull from. So we're looking at rainforest. Tropical rainforests are disappearing. You've seen it in the news, heard things where the rainforest is on fire. We've talked a lot about the Amazon rainforest, but they do carry a lot of importance, and it's part of this natural capital that we have. Rainforests tend to be near the equator. We'll look at biomes later and talk about some of the different ones, but tropical rainforests, they tend to be near the Earth's equator. They only cover about 7% of the total Earth, so fairly small percent, obviously less than 10%, but they contain up to half of the world's known terrestrial plant and animal species. So only on 7% of the planet, but 50% of the known plant and animal species live there. Now, it's not always the only place they live, but we find them in the rainforest. And a lot of the harmful effects of their disruption as you read through and look at it. Well, when we cut down the rainforest, we're reducing biodiversity. We're taking out the habitat, so not as many things can live there. This also accelerates climate change. We cut out the trees, we don't have the natural vegetation, leads to runoff. We get into one of those positive feedback loops. Also, it changes regional weather patterns. If you take out the rainforest, you don't have as much trees putting moisture back in their rainforest because they get a lot of rain. It rains there almost every day. You remove a lot of the trees, there's not as much respiration going on, not giving off as much water, you don't get as much rain. It changes those weather patterns, which affects lots of people. And once again, it's a picture you see. This is just one where in the picture is from 1975. You see all the green, the natural capital. 2003, looking at the picture, you see how the city of Santa Cruz has spread and is taking over this whole area. So people are going in, moving in there, living there, taking up space, but they're cutting down trees, etc., taking habitat out. But this is just some of this natural capital degradation that we will continue to talk about really through the whole chapter. Let's look at the Earth's life support system, the major components. Now, I take a little bit of issue with how the book puts it here because I like to try and think of things in order. If I were to say it, I would say let's talk about the geosphere, the rocks, minerals, and soil kind of at the bottom. Then we can talk about the hydrosphere because the hydrosphere sits on top of the geosphere. Then I would talk about the biosphere, all the living things, because we find them in the geosphere, in the hydrosphere, and lastly in the atmosphere. But the book kind of runs through them. It talks about atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, biosphere, which is fine as long as you know what they are. The air, the water, the rocks, minerals, soil, and the living things. All of these work together for it to be there. So let's break them down a little bit. I'm not going to go into super detail on these, but just in general. The atmosphere. This includes the air we breathe and everything from the ground or the water level up to what we would then call outer space. The innermost layer is the troposphere. That is where you and I live and have our being. This is where almost all weather on the planet takes place, where we have clouds, rain, wind, you name it. That happens in the troposphere. Right above that is the stratosphere. The stratosphere contains the ozone layer. The ozone is like our Earth's shield. It's like sunscreen for the planet. It removes about 95% of the harmful UV rays from the sun, making life possible here on the Earth. Above the stratosphere, we have the mesosphere, which is actually one of the coldest layers, but which is also the one that protects us mainly from asteroids. They tend to burn up in that layer. Above that is the thermosphere, where it gets really, really thin, and above the thermosphere, we're really into outer space. We're really just focusing on the bottom two. Troposphere, where all the weather happens. Stratosphere, where we find the ozone layer, because we'll talk and reference that. The hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is pretty simple. Hydro refers to water, so it's everything to do with water. 97% of all of our water, salt water, leaving only 3% that's fresh water. And of this, about 70% of that is frozen up in the ice caps at any given time. So only 3% of our water on the entire planet is fresh water, and a bunch of that at any point in time is locked up in ice, the polar ice caps, glaciers, snow, what have you, leaving very little for you and I to really use. And some's trapped in the atmosphere, part of the water cycle, but there we go. Then the geosphere. Now the geosphere, going into Earth space, we could spend a long time on the geosphere, where we talk about the inner core, outer core, mantle, crust. Think of an apple. You slice an apple in half. I probably should have one here for you, but you're going to have to use your SpongeBob imagination. The core of the apple, that's about the size of the core. All the white meat, what we want to eat in an apple, is the mantle. That very thin skin, that's the crust. That's where you and I live, walk around, and everything sits on top of that. Now that upper part, that crust where we all live, have everything going on, this is where we find our rocks, our mineral, our soil, all the things that organisms need to live and grow, reproduce, etc. And this also where it contains our non-renewable fossil fuels. These are up in that crust, the very upper layer, which is what we're going to focus on primarily in environmental science. And then the biosphere. Very simply, this is the part of the planet that contains life. Some of it is under the ground, usually not real deep, but we have bacteria, fungi, ants, termites, moles. Some things live below the ground. Some things live above the ground, in the water, or on the land, like you and I walking around, or dolphins in the fish. And some things live in the atmosphere. The biosphere ranges really to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, so maybe 7 miles below sea level, to about 5 miles or so up into the atmosphere. We don't find very many living things above 5 miles up in the atmosphere. You start to get very little at that point. But there you go. Those are the 4 major components that we were going to discuss about. We're going to look at 3 factors that help sustain life on the planet Earth. First one is just this one-way flow of energy from the sun. One of those first principles of environmental science, solar energy. Energy comes from the sun. This is what warms up the troposphere where you and I live, and provides the energy needed for plants to grow, which is where we then wind up getting most of our energy that we eat or consume. Then there's the cycling of nutrients, which was also part of that chemical cycling, one of those 6 main ideas. And we have to cycle the nutrients within the biosphere for things to continue to stay alive. And gravity. Gravity holds the atmosphere in. Without gravity, our air would escape and we wouldn't have life as we know it. So gravity plays a big key factor to sustain life. Energy from the sun, cycling of nutrients, one thing dies, something else uses it, and lastly, gravity to hold it all in place, to hold it all in check. And we can kind of look at those, that aspect from here, not to scale remotely, but sun bringing the energy in, gravity holding it all into place so that our atmosphere remains there, the stratosphere blocking out the UV light so that things can survive in the atmosphere where we have weather, etc. That, for the most part, wraps it up for Chapter 3, Section 1. Look forward to seeing you next time when we look at the components of an ecosystem. Anyway, take care, guys, and we'll see you in a little while.